Welcome to Keith Knight Don't Tread on Anyone and the Libertarian Institute. This is the story of how Winston Churchill's debacle in Norway got him promoted to Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. I'm quoting from Human Smoke, The Beginnings of World War II and the End of Civilization by Nicholson Baker. Winston Churchill, Lord of the Admiralty, wrote a memo about mining Norwegian waters. Iron ore, which made steel, which made the tools of war, was getting through to Germany from Norwegian points of entry. Stopping the influx of iron ore through the remote port of Narvik above the Arctic Circle would cripple the enemy's industry, Churchill contended, and it might succeed in provoking Germany into an imprudent action which would open the door for us. The plan, codenamed Wilfred, was minor and innocent, he told his admirals. Hints of Churchill's plan appeared in the press, alerting the German high command, which made counterplans. Prime Minister Chamberlain didn't like the Narvik idea partly because it was illegal. Norway was a neutral country, and sowing mines in neutral harbors was contrary to international law. It was also a war-widening provocation. German admirals mused over the consequences of losing Norwegian ports. The war would be as good as lost, they said. Vidkun Quisling, the former war minister of Norway, began talks with Hitler about setting up a puppet government. There had been no plans in Berlin for an invasion of Norway. Now there were. It was March 1940. Harold Nicholson noted in his diary that the British Navy was laying mines in Norwegian waters. "This will create a rage," he said. It was April 8th, 1940. A Swedish foreign officer dropped by Undersecretary Cadogan's office. "Says we have done the silliest thing in history in our own interests," Cadogan wrote. "And I think he is right, but I had to argue with him." The Norwegian government protests gravely and strongly against this open breach of international law, said Norway's foreign minister. German forces surged in. By April 9th, 1940, they were in control of an unbombed Oslo and of Narvik. "Germans seem to have got into Narvik," wrote Undersecretary Cadogan. "How?" Suddenly, it was a real war on the ground. There were midnight landings on Norwegian soil of small English and French forces, which were set upon by German airplanes. The French had forgotten their mules. The English had no snowshoes. One group commandeered some horse-drawn sleds from local peasants and surged through the drifts. A squadron of RAF planes was sunk when it parked on a frozen lake, and the Luftwaffe bombed the ice. The Royal Air Force began raiding Norwegian airports under German control, sometimes with delayed action bombs. Then, British retreat, disaster, excoriation, and leaping outrage in the press and Parliament. The outrage was aimed not at Churchill, who had conceived of the Norwegian campaign, but at Chamberlain. "The first of our glorious evacuations," H.G. Wells said later, "a debacle. Or not a debacle, if what you wanted was noble chaos, wounded struggle, a spotlight trained on Chamberlainian indecisiveness, and the image above all of a stoic England, beset but steadfast, carrying bravely on in a world everywhere enslaved and prostrate. Norway was Winston's adventure, and poor Neville blamed for it," Chips Cannon wrote in his diary. So, this was the final straw that got Neville Chamberlain to step down and got Winston Churchill appointed as Prime Minister May 10th, 1940. You might want to say, well, unfortunately, you have to do some terrible things so good people can really take charge and they can defeat the evil in the world, that in this case were the National Socialists in Germany. Here's Winston Churchill in his book The Gathering Storm in March of 1948. "One day, President Roosevelt told me that he was asking publicly for suggestions about what the war should be called. I said at once, 'The unnecessary war.' There never was a war more easy to stop than that which has just wrecked what was left of the world from the previous struggle. The human tragedy reaches its climax in the fact that after all the exhortations and sacrifices of hundreds of millions of people, and the victories of the righteous cause, we have still not found peace or security, and that we lie in the grip of even worse perils than those we have surmounted. In other words, on September 3rd, 1939, Neville Chamberlain and the United Kingdom declared war on Germany for violating Poland's independence by the invasion of Danzig. After 6 years of bloodshed, millions of people killed, millions of men enslaved, billions in property damage, millions of lives ruined, they gave Poland to Joseph Stalin. Here is how Pat Buchanan ends his book, Churchill, Hitler, and the Unnecessary War, in his chapter on Churchill. In Cairo, in 1943, Churchill was entertaining Macmillan. The war had passed its crisis point, and Churchill seemed briefly to realize that after all the spilled blood and lost treasure, Stalin might emerge as master of Europe. One monstrous regime about to replace another that was slowly being strangled to death. He turned suddenly to Macmillan. "Cromwell was a great man, wasn't he?" Churchill asked. "Yes, sir, a very great man," Macmillan replied. "Ah, but he made one terrible mistake," Churchill went on. "Obsessed in his youth by fear of the power of Spain, he failed to observe the rise of France. Will that be said of me?" "Yes, it will be said of him. He had been a great man at the cost of his country's greatness." Thank you for watching Keith Knight Don't Tread on Anyone and the Libertarian Institute.
Silver lining there, but this is what central planning does in healthcare, in education, in infrastructure, in policing, in everything, in every single thing when government gets their hooks on it. And it's not because of this party's bad or this politician's bad. It's because of the system itself. When you have a system that is financed by extortion and enforced not by merit or by value, but by threats and violence, they don't have to actually work. If I had a company, if we open, me and Nate, we open Nate and Spike's Chicken Shack, okay? And our model for Nate and Spike's Chicken Shack is anyone who dares to walk anywhere near our store, we point a gun in their face and say, "Give me all the money in your wallet." And we get all the money and we go, "This entitles you to X number of chicken sandwiches over the next month. Great job, everyone." And then they come in and they try to get their chicken sandwiches. Do you think those sandwiches are going to be good? Do you think that we're going to have any need at all whatsoever to make sure that people are getting their sandwiches in a timely fashion or that they're not poisonous, much less tasty? Is there any reason to think that that's going to work out well? No, because it's extortion. We've removed the entire profit motive and incentive of providing value that makes us have to provide more value than the money we're receiving in exchange. That's how the entire world works. Every single person or organization on earth, except for the government or its cronies that are attached to it, like now the healthcare sector, are expected to provide more value than the money they're receiving, or else they won't get any money and their competitors will. This is why central planning always fails. It's by the very nature of how it exists. And that's the problem that we're facing.